Can everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I kept trying to come up with a joke about how tonight we're going to talk about a boiler contract or something, but I just couldn't come up with anything worthwhile. But we appreciate all of you.
Asphalt contracts.
Those are too big, though. Those I should be serious. We do thank you all for coming out on a cold night. I'm glad we still have enough seats, and even a couple reserved RPAC seats that we might not need if they're not coming. This started kind of back in the spring of 2018 when RPAC actually was, and the rec department held meetings to discuss possible rule changes at the park. And among, dogs on leash and bicycles and scooters and all those types of things, some folks brought up the potential to change this rule, the opening up Matheson Park that's in non-residents. We're here as the Board of Trustees tonight to listen. First, we're going to hear from, our village attorney about the deeds that, have been, kind of front and center of this whole thing for so long. Then we're going to hear from RPAC. Additionally, we had asked all the department heads if they had any input at this stage of the process. And, I spoke to Larry and, basically they all said that they're ready to answer questions, I guess, when we have more information and we have some direction from the Board of Trustees. No decisions are being made tonight. We're not going to be answering questions tonight. This is our first public hearing. We're going to basically come up with all of the questions, concerns tonight, things we have to think about and address before we make any changes. And I think that that's kind of the overall rules. Since we do have such a good turnout, we are going to be enforcing our 3-minute rule. I will tell you when there's 30 seconds left, so you can start to wrap up. And when we get to 3 minutes, I will let you finish your sentence, as long as you don't breathe more than twice. Then if you have more to say, you can always go at the end when everyone else who's spoken for the first time has already spoken. But we do want to hear from as many people as possible, so that's why we think that that's an important thing to do. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to the village attorney, who's looked into the deeds for us, and I think there's a little history lesson with it as well. But I'll turn it over to you, Marianne.
I think for many years the village was under the mistaken belief that there's a deed restriction limiting Matheson Park to village residents. And I believe I've cleared that up for the board, but hopefully we'll clear it up for anybody who's confused tonight. In short, spoiler alert, the misunderstanding arises from language in the deed to a very small portion of the park part of this northern end. If you can look on that map, the area is close to the 1947 deed, that little piece of land. What's under the 1947 deed and the 1945 deed, that is all Matheson Park. Part underwater, part not, and then that little piece above is when I talk about the 1947 deed, that's what it refers to. But in the deed that conveys 90% of the park to the village, and I'll go through the details and show you the deed language, states that the park must be used for the benefit and enjoyment of the public, with no restriction or any language suggesting that it be restricted to village residents. So let me go through the history of the acquisition of the parks and the two deeds conveying it. But before Larry switches to the first deed, first we're talking about that big parcel that says 1945 deed. You see a line through there, that's because it was conveyed in 2 parcels, but that's the main part of the park. Okay, Larry, you can switch to the 1945 deed. Okay. And this was the main part of the park. It was 8.55 acres to 9.5 acres. A lot of it was underwater at the time. It was conveyed from Ralph and Madge Matheson to the village in this deed. And the deed conveyed the 2 parcels I showed you before. And Larry, if you switch to page 3, okay, and go down The one, okay. And then the paragraph reads, in consideration of the grant of the said premises hereby conveyed, the party of the second part, which is the village, covenants agrees with the parties of the first part, which was Matheson's, that it will not hereafter occupy, develop, or use the premises, or permit it to be occupied, developed, or used for any purposes other than as a park for the benefit and enjoyment of the public. So this is the deed to the main part of the park. There's nothing else anywhere else in the deed that restricts or refers to its use only by village residents. Then the remaining portion of the park, that small piece at the top, is the 1947 deed. That was conveyed, okay, then if we switch to the next deed, the 1947 deed.
That's it.
Wait, this is 1947 deed?
This is, yeah.
Okay, just go to the first page. Okay, so this deed was from the Seaboard Surety Company to the village, dated October 29, 1947. And now, Larry, now switch to, what's the, page 74. Okay, and that one states, in consideration of the grant of the said premises hereby conveyed, the party of the second part, again, the village, covenants and agrees with the party of the first part, which was Seaboard Surety Company, that it will not hereafter occupy, develop, or use the premises hereby conveyed, or any part thereof, for any purposes other than as a park for the benefit and enjoyment of the people of the village of Irvington. So this is where I think the misunderstanding came from, because it wasn't one of the deeds, but it was a deed to a small part of the park. Interestingly, earlier in the deed, Larry, if you don't mind going back 2 pages, it would be page 72. I guess in the second paragraph, yeah, where it talks about the assumption of the obligation hereinafter expressed forever to restrict the use of the premises hereby conveyed to a public park. So that actually said it would be a public park, but the actual conditional language did say it was a town park for the people in Irvington. All right, so I think the deeds on their face are clear, and it's the main portion of the park is not limited to Irvington residents. But I don't think you need to go to the minutes because the language is clear in its face. But if you do go to the minutes, it's also sort of clear that the intent was that the parks be open to the public. Now, there was not the deed from the Mathesons was accepted in June 1945, and there's nothing in those minutes except a reference to a letter from a Paul Wendell's, which nobody's been able to get. Not that it would make a big difference because the deed reads the way the deed reads. But in earlier minutes, this is the March 1945 one, Larry, yeah, there's a letter from Seaboard Surety. And if you go to page 200 of those minutes, and it was, Seaboard Surety was buying the property, part of the Matheson's property. They were going to do business there, and then they ended up not doing that. But anyway, and they wrote to the village and said, we understand, what's that, about the third paragraph down, Larry. Just make sure I have the third paragraph down. We understand that Mr. Matheson expects to dedicate to the village of Irvington in the near future the present Matheson Park and the land underwater adjoining it on condition that business and industry shall forever be excluded and that it should be used forever as a public park. You see that at the end of the paragraph. Then in August 1947, Larry, the next set of minutes. Okay, so August 1947, Seaboard wrote to the village again to offer to donate a portion of the land that it had purchased from the Mathesons. That's that little piece at the top. And they wanted to convey it to the village, and the conveyance to the village would be subject to the covenants contained in the Matheson deed. That's what it said. And if you go to page 9, Larry, at the middle of the page, yeah, that block quote in the middle. it specifies that that condition would be in consideration of the grant of said premises, the village will not hereafter occupy, develop, or use the premises, blah, 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 for any purpose other than as a park for the benefit and enjoyment of the public. And then the village wrote back to Seaboard stating that it'll accept the dedication subject to the conditions set forth in that letter. That's a little bit further on in the minutes.
This page?
Wait, could you just go back up a second? I'm trying to read that top paragraph that you're just missing. Right below what you just read, the writer will be glad to appear. Because the last line there says, which may benefit the residents of the village of Irvington.
Yeah. But
So
when they're talking
public-
about, but when they're, well, this is not a back and forth, I'm just telling you, I read of it, and the condition is that it be open as a park to the public except for that piece I showed you, so that's about it on the deeds.
But in 1945, it was meant to.
Anyway, I show you the minutes just because the minutes back up the point, but the, as I said, if the language of the deed is not ambiguous, which this language is not, then you just follow the deed. And that's it, Mike.
Great. Well, no one's been more involved in the parks or all the recreational programs than, well, other than Joe Archino, than the Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee. They take their job very seriously, and I think we have the finest recreation services in Westchester County. You know, our offerings for a town our size, we see it in revenue generated, we see it in offerings, we see it in so many different ways. So they were the group that we didn't give them the option, we wanted to hear from them. We also, you know, that they've also heard from the public a lot on things they wanted in the parks and changes they wanted in the parks as well. So to me, there's no bigger voice in all of this than RPAC and Joe and the staff. So, Joe, I believe you're going to speak first?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
First of all, I'm glad to be here with everyone. I've had the privilege of sitting in this room in 1988 when the pool was discussed, in 1997 when Scenic Hudson Park was a blip on the screen, and now we're here again with another very important topic for everyone. So I do have some longevity, and I have been through quite a bit. And I will tell you that I took this job 34 years ago because as I drove down Main Street on the day of my interview, I saw the Hudson River and said, wow, and happened to spend the afternoon in Matheson Park and remembered saying, you know, for a kid from Portchester, this is a little different and pretty cool. So it means a great deal to me, it really does, as does all the parks we're responsible for. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to get into the deed or whatever, but I do think it's important for everyone here, whether you're pro or con the park being changed, because I do think there are some facts out there that just are a little bit misleading, and that I'd like to make sure you understand, and that I'm quite anxious to hear from everyone who's going to speak here tonight. Back in January, when we started the process, as Mayor Smith mentioned, you know, one of the things we wanted to do was, you know, to see what direction, oh, by the way, I forgot, I've been to the dog park also. We wanted to see what message we would get from the community. RPAC, Recreation and Park Advisory Committee, who are the volunteers that I'm first responsible for, have always had a policy that when we're not sure, or there seems to be a difference of opinion, have a public meeting, see what the public tells us. Well, at that public meeting, the message was clear. Brian covered them, but I'd like to go over them again. Matheson Park was kind of old and sad and needed an upgrade. The playground needed to be replaced. We needed to reintroduce water. We had to do away with our archaic rules of not allowing bikes or scooters. We wanted a place where there could be a performance stage. We wanted to consider allowing dogs back into the park, okay? And then the other issue that came up was many people wanted us to discuss opening the park to the general public. RPAC's position at that time is, because we felt that was a decision for the board, is we did not want to get bogged down on that. We really wanted to focus on the things that the public said they wanted, because there we could have a say and we could have an impact. Well, in March, under the leadership of RPAC Vice Chair Janet Kovacs and Assistant Superintendent of Parks Maureen DePaoli, we put a volunteer committee together which helped to develop a new playground, a splash pad, a new 12-foot wide pathway, which would then allow us to allow bikes and scooters, because our insurance company says Scenic Hudson and Matheson, as they currently are not safe and don't mix. So we wanted to make sure we could do that. We want to give the bathrooms a facelift, so we started working on all of that. Made a proposal to the village board, and we were funded to go forward with the project. We hope to go out to bid next week. We hope to begin construction in March. We hope to have the project completed by the end of September. So that's where we got to where we are. But here's what you need to know. There's been a lot of talk, and what's hurt me quite a bit is that a lot of people have said, you know, we're not inclusive, we're not welcoming, we don't let people in. I just want to share some facts with you. We have one of the largest adult softball programs in Westchester County. 412 participants played this past season. 330 of those were non-residents. Okay? 330, that's 81%. We host the largest high school summer basketball league in Westchester County. There are 16 teams, a total of 215 participants. 186 of them are non-residents. We now are partners with the Greenberg United Soccer Program. 30% of their 141 members are non-residents. And then we took a look at 11 generic rec programs. It totaled 900 participants. Of those 900 participants, 202 of them were non-residents. It hardly sounds like a place that doesn't welcome non-residents. We need non-residents to help our programs to be offered. We want them in our programs. Matheson was always defined because, again, and if you had come to the rec department at any point prior to the last year and asked for the deed to Matheson Park, you would have been given which deed, Mr. Schaffer? The 1947 deed. And so I had that request maybe 50 times in over my years, and the deed I would always give someone was 1947. I never saw the 1945 deed. We had a Rec and Parks Committee do a comprehensive study back in the early 2000s, and we used the 1947 deed. Kathy, you were part of that committee. So there were some new things that came to light. So here's the first thing I want to say before I go into a little bit more. If Mary Ann's assessment and the board accepts the fact that the 47 deed is the deed, well, the first thing that RPAC and the rec department are going to ask the village board to do is to allow all of the East Irvington School District, or the school district residents who aren't village residents, to have the ability to get a pass to Matheson Park at a nominal fee like they do for all the other programs they participate in. If you're in day camp and you're a village resident, you pay one fee. If you're a school district resident, you pay another fee. That's been one of the most difficult things for me to enforce all these years, is to say no to people who are in 95% of our programs. So if there's not a restriction there anymore, that's the first thing we'd like to see happen. We'd like to invite them. We'd like to make them become part of everything we do. And that's a lot of people. You know, you go from maybe 6,300 people to 10,000 people when you put the two populations together. And again, you know, between 20 to 25% of every single program we have is made up of people from the school district. Some of them get skewed, like the softball, where 80% are non-residents. So we think that is, again, another sign how our department and the members of RPAC feel that, you know, we are inclusive, and we think that would be a great first step if the board would consider that. Mr. Smith is going to address that a little more when he speaks on behalf of RPAC. But here's some other things you need to understand. The reason we've not come forward and say open Matheson Park is we don't think with the way things are, if you open that park to the general public, that we can maintain it to the level that you would like to see it maintained. Now, I'm not talking about now in the fall or in the winter when it's raining and there's no one down there and the geese could go down there. I'm talking about your prime times, April through August, when the park is really at its premium and everybody wants to go down there. If, I keep getting thrown at me, you got to do what Dobbs Ferry's doing. You have to do what Dobbs Ferry's doing. Well, you know what Dobbs Ferry is considering right now? They're considering taking out every barbecue pit in their waterfront park. Because 75% of the people who attend their park on Saturdays and Sundays are non-residents. Okay? 50% of the people who go to their park take the train to get there. The rec department in Dobbs Ferry has no say on what happens in the park on the weekends. It's managed by the Dobbs Ferry Police Department. You have to get a group permit a month in advance, but if you want a parking pass, you go to the Dobbs Ferry Police Department. If you want to have a specific event, you have to go to the Dobbs Ferry Police Department. They're overwhelmed because they can't manage it. They're looking to create a park ranger position. If they do, it's not going to be run by Recreation, it's going to be an employee of the Dobbs Ferry Police Department. So there's a lot of issues to deal with. Matheson's one gate. The gate attendants we have at Matheson for the most part over the years aren't people who are going to be able to deal with heavy confrontation. And if you're going to be dealing with people taking the train in, if anyone doesn't think people will use the train, you've never come to July 4th. And on the way out of the park, looked at the train platform to see the hundreds of people waiting to leave. So our vision is, how do we deal with that? How do we run the park the way we can and still make sure residents are going to get their opportunity to use their park? My job is to protect your tax dollars, your first, okay? So I have to look at that. I can't do it the way it is right now. Just throw some examples at you. Our department is responsible for Memorial Park, Matheson Park, Halsey Pond, Scenic Hudson Park, Hastings Park, the Irvington Woods Park, the O'Hara Nature Center, the I.K. Benjamin Community Center, the Senior Citizen Center. I have 2 full-time parks employees, okay? And I have to supplement it with part-timer after part-timer after part-timer. And it is not an easy thing to do. And sure, you can say the things you want about the geese, but I'm very proud of the way our parks look, okay? I'm very proud of what we've done at the Nature Center. And for what we do, we try to maintain it the best we can. If it's now just totally open, it changes. And please, please don't compare Scenic Hudson Park to Matheson Park. Matheson Park is a destination park. Matheson Park is a place where you go and you probably will have at least 2 meals of the day while you're down there for the event you attend. Scenic Hudson Park is a place you go to take a walk, to play a game, to visit the senior center, to walk your stroller. It is not a place you spend 4, 5, or 6 hours. When the park was designed, there were many hours in this room where we discussed, because there was a great deal of concern from residents, what happens if we open it up? It's going to be overwhelmed. So we had to design the park so that everyone could get to enjoy it, but it would still be able to be managed and not eat up a ton of tax dollars. So no benches were put in, no fire pits were put in. We couldn't allow tents because we had limitations with the ground. We could only go 3 feet into the ground with any types of stakes and things. So, that was thought of. Dobbs Ferry will tell you they're trying to make their waterfront park Scenic Hudson Park because they can't manage what they have. I fear that would happen to us, okay? Has nothing to do with wanting non-residents or not wanting it. It has to do with how do we maintain it? How does our budget change? How much money do you taxpayers have to provide if you want us to do that? And to think that people will not come, in my humble opinion, is extremely naive. Because how are we going to be any different from what Dobbs Ferry does? And Dobbs Ferry does it with the police department, not just with recreation and park staff. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay. The other thing is that there's been a lot of people who've said there are no such thing as private parks in Irvington. Well, in Greenburgh, which has enormous numbers of parks. It's simple. There's a simple dividing line. If they have a park where they've accepted any type of funding, federal funding, that park is open to everyone. If they have parks that are not funded and are totally funded by tax dollars, those are residents only, and they are strictly enforced to be used by residents only. Okay? Scarsdale, residents, all residents only. There are many communities, and this was where it's kind of funny, and I looked at some of my colleagues and it scratched my head. Scarsdale does patrol, Greenberg does residents only. Yorktown residents only, Eastchester residents only, Rye residents only, Lewisboro residents only. And there are more, but the reason I listed those is although they are residents only, they have no ability to enforce it. The only time they deal with a non-resident issue is if there's a problem. So look, I live in Rye, okay? I just assumed that Rye parks were open to everyone because there's no ins, there's a million ways in and there's a million ways out. So there's no way for them to police it, where we're kind of landlocked where we are. So, I'm almost done, I'm sorry. So I think that's basically it. So basically to sum up where I'm coming from, cooperative programs, again, I want to go back to that notion of not doing things. There was a meeting 2 weeks ago for the Rivertown administrators, and there was a presentation made on what cooperative programs are going on. And the only reason I can say this with a great deal of confidence is our administrator was there. In almost every sighting of cooperative programs, the name that came up was the Village of Irvington, because we lead the river towns in trying to get people together. We have the Irvington Rec Youth Girls Basketball Program is running conjunction with Dobbs Ferry and Sleepy Hollow. Dobbs Ferry Rec Summer Basketball League, which we've helped create, uses Dobbs Ferry, Ardsley, Sleepy Hollow, and Elmsford. We have a Winter Rec Basketball Program, again, with Dobbs, Terrytown, and Elmsford. We talked about our softball league. We talked about the O'Hara. We have a joint flag football program with the city of Harrison. We have a youth softball program with Pleasantville, Briarcliff, Austin, Cortland, and Croton. We have a youth baseball program with Rybrook, Greenwich, and Pleasantville. And yes, I'm going to say this, and please don't laugh at me. We've been asked to set up a Rivertown pickleball program. Okay, so as I'm learning about pickleball, we will be throwing that out there very soon. Again, I give those examples because I just want you to see again. This isn't a community, this isn't a department, this isn't a board that expects us to just sit there in a little shell and protect everything. We don't. We're aggressive, we want to do things, but we also have a responsibility to do it within the budget we're given and to make sure we protect your tax dollars. So whatever decision is made, you know, I've been on this horse with you guys for a long time. I'll figure out a way to make work whatever you decide. But when you're thinking about it, you have to think about some of the things I've thrown out there tonight. And again, I would urge that our first move be to get permission to help let us figure out a way to invite and include in our neighbors from the Irvington School District. So, thank you. And I'd like to introduce Michael Smith, who's representing the Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Joe. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a 35-year resident of Irvington, and I've been asked to present the unanimous recommendation of RPAC on the issue of whether and under what circumstances there should be a change to opening Matheson to non-residents, assuming no legal impediment to do so. Our chair, Rick Rasulo, is on vacation, and our vice chair, Janet Kovacs, is spearheading the committee on the $1.6 million renovation of Matheson Park to take place next year.
Use the microphone.
Sure. So before I tell you about the unanimous recommendation, let me just give you a little bit of different kind of history of Matheson Park having nothing to do with the legalities. And that is in 1922, the village leased the property from the Mathesons. And they used it, the village decided to use it as a park, and the village decided that it would be residents only. In '45, when the property was acquired from the Mathesons, again, the village continued to use it as a park and continued, even before the '47 deed, continued to use it as a residents-only park. And then in 1989, the village board passed a local ordinance dedicating, among other things, Matheson Park for the benefit of the residents of the village of Irvington. So for almost 100 years, the park, by virtue of decisions made by the village, has been used as a residents-only park. So what we're here to decide is whether there are compelling reasons to change that. So Matheson Park is unique among the riverfront parks in the county. First, it was the only riverfront park in Irvington until Scenic Hudson was opened. But it's unique for the following reasons. It actually has a gate at which you could check permits. Unlike the parks that Joe was talking about, which are open to all, unlike Pearson Park in Tarrytown, in which there's no way to check anything, we actually have a gate. There's a beach. There's proximity to water, there's proximity to the trains, and there's proximity to the bridge. In this day and age, those present, in our opinion, whether they be security issues or not, they do present an issue. In fact, it's funny about the beach, because even before the park was leased in 1922, it was used, the beach part was used, even though the Mathesons owned it, the village residents used the beach part, even before 1922. And it has the barbecue facilities and picnic tables. So given all that, it is unique among the river parks. And after Scenic Park opened, the utilization of Matheson Park decreased, along with a decrease of parking available at Matheson Park, both because of the village turning over parking facilities to Metro North, and because of the development of Bridge Street. For example, I moved here at the end of 1984. My daughters were born in 1985, 1988, even before the playground that's there was built. We used to park on the riverside of the train station, where there are now Metro North parking spots. Those spots are not there. One of the challenges for increased utilization by anybody at Matheson Park will be, where are they going to park? As many of you know, parking is an issue in the village in general. But we are interested in driving usage of Matheson Park. One of the things that we're keeping an eye on is, where are people going to park? So earlier this year, as Mayor Smith mentioned, we held public meetings on changing the rules, and one of the things that came up is, how do we increase the utilization of Matheson Park? And the public's ideas were incorporated by the committee led by Janet, and it developed this $1.6 million plan, which has been adopted by the board, where the playground will be renovated, water play areas will be built. There will now be wheeled toys, scooters, bikes being allowed in the park, as they have to widen the paved areas to accomplish that. And all of that will happen next year, when the park will probably be closed at least from March until September 2020. And most of the park itself will be closed off. So most of the park next year will not even be open. So now let me tell you what RPAC's unanimous recommendation is. And that is that we change the sign on Matheson Park from a residents-only park to one which says park permit required. Park permits are now issued to residents. And we recommend unanimously that park permits be issued to school district residents for the payment of a nominal to very modest fee to help defray the expenses of our parks, much the same way that school district residents currently pay a slightly higher fee for our rec programs. We have not discussed the amount. All I can say is it's not an amount designed to discourage anybody from getting a park permit, because even the difference now that non-residents pay to participate in rec programs is not designed to discourage them. Doing this would open actually Matheson Park to all school district residents immediately. So we would recommend that it's a park permit required, since park permits now are issued to Irvington residents, instead of saying it's a residents-only park. We also recommend unanimously that the board actually defer consideration of whether to open Matheson Park to any other non-residents until after we can determine how the park's renovations and opening the park to school district residents will affect the utilization of the park. It is our hope that it actually will drive up utilization. It is our hope that more people will use it, but parking will be a challenge. But we want to judge how that will happen. And since this board is spending $1.6 million of village taxpayer money, and the park will be substantially closed for most of 2020, we do not see any compelling reason to decide now on whether to open the park to any other non-residents beyond school district residents. There's no way of knowing how many permits you could be allowed to issue to other non-residents, if at all, until after we've had the experience with a renovated park, the use by school district residents, and where they will be parking. We believe that a minimum of at least 1 full year's experience is both reasonable and necessary. So after the $1.6 million renovation, and after we've had a 1 year's experience of whether it is driving any greater usage of the park by both residents and school district residents, we think that is the appropriate time to at least then consider whether to open it to any other non-residents on a permit-required basis, and if so, how many such permits you may want to issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now we're moving on to the public comment section. Again, I'm going to be timing you. I'll give you a warning when you get to 2 minutes 30 seconds, so you can start to wrap up. I've also been asked to say that if anybody has childcare concerns, you've dropped your children off somewhere, hopefully you didn't leave them abandoned at home, I welcome you to be among the first speakers. It usually seems like the first speaker is tough to get to come up anyway, so if you have childcare issues, feel free to come up right now and be one of our first speakers.
There are also seats here, if you don't want to stand, here, and that is no longer reserved, so stand or there are spots.
And
I don't have childcare, but I'll brave.
sure, you can be first, come on up.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the
How do
things,
you like
that's
to do this? Face you, or I don't like to turn my back on all these.
you figure, typically you face us.
Address the board. I don't address them.
Good evening. I've addressed you. May I turn around? My name is Carol Demas. My husband Stuart Allen and I have lived at 250 Taxter Road in East Irvington for 33 years. At our recent East Irvington Civic Association board meeting, we discussed this situation. But I'm here tonight just as a local citizen to express my views and share my personal experience with what I believe is an inequity and to ask for your consideration. I am encouraged by what I've heard tonight. Stuart and I have no children. We bought a small bungalow. We enlarged it over time. We have paid over $600,000 in school taxes to Irvington in the 33 years that we have been here. I'm told that East Irvington residents also pay more than villagers for Irvington rec offerings, but that was discussed. I'm one of many East Irvington residents who make active contributions to life in Irvington. Some people in the school board, as volunteer firemen in other ways. We love the village. We think of it as home. During my 59-year career so far, I starred on The Magic Garden, which was the most successful regional show in the children's television history. And as gifts to the Irvington Library and the school children, my co-star, Paula Janis, and I performed a show in Matheson Park. And as a gift, we performed a family concert in the Irvington Recreation Hall. And later, when I tried to enter Matheson Park for an event, I had no school children to accompany me. I was asked to show my proof of address, and I was turned away. Just a few years ago, I learned that the Irvington Theater skylight in poor condition had been sealed for decades, limiting air circulation and shortening the theater's active season. I sang a concert, excuse me. It took months to create it, but it attracted attention and funds for the repair of the skylight. It was very well attended. It attracted donations, and the goal was reached, and we had a little celebration ceremony, and I wasn't invited. And I just thought, well, I think Irvington is trying to tell me something. East Irvington is home to several extraordinary parks. Taxter Ridge, 200 acres, beautiful forest, miles of trails. East Irvington Park Preserve, 37 acres of trails, cliffs, woods, a pond full of frogs. It's both parks. We have parking, we admit dogs, and so we're frequented by many families, including residents of this village, because they can't bring their dogs to your parks.
30 seconds.
And thank you. I sang a concert to begin the effort to save Taxter Ridge. We raised $25,000 for seed money, and we worked for years with East Irvington committees to preserve those spaces, which are open to all of you. They're open to everyone. I hope Irvington will consider that East Irvington residents should not continue to be treated as outsiders, and that Irvington parks be open not only to us, but perhaps to all, if that is a practical answer.
3 minutes.
Thank you. Perhaps we could all help maintain it. I volunteer to pitch in.
Who's next?
Hi, my name is Sarah Parganos. I'm a newbie. I moved here about 5 months ago, so that either makes me not qualified to really speak, or maybe like a fresh set of eyes. Because when we chose Irvington, I actually did not know anything about Matheson being private, and we're actually building a house over on Fargo Lane. And while we're building, I'm renting right across the street from Matheson. So I see Matheson all the time. And I didn't discover that it was private until my sister, who lives over in Tarrytown, mentioned it to me one day when I told her to go kill time there. And she was like, well, I can't. And I was like, what? So that's how I discovered it. And I was actually very upset because we chose Irvington. I have 3 small children, and we chose Irvington specifically because we wanted a very inclusive town to raise our children. And this sentiment just felt very exclusive. And the reason why I thought it might be good to stand up and share my view is because I am a young mom, and I just moved here, so I'm meeting a lot of other young moms in other villages at mommy and me classes, and saying, oh, what village do you live in, and when did you move, and oh yeah, we considered Irvington, and oh, we, all of that. And unfortunately, a lot of feedback that I have gotten directly and also indirectly that I hear through my sister, who lives in Tarrytown, is there's a lot of dislike for this village from other villages because of this feeling like we're not welcoming. And I appreciate the statistics that you read that speak otherwise, and that's helpful to hear. But there are statistics, and then there's like what people feel, and I don't know like how meaningful the statistics are if people are feeling something else, and that's my concern. Is what are people experiencing in real life, and what did it say on a piece of paper? And not that that's not real, but I want to feel like I'm living in a place that is welcoming everyone. And the points that have been brought up, I hear that those are legitimate and real and make sense. However, I also, like I said, I want to I feel like there's some middle ground that we can find where we're not saying you're not allowed. And like the woman that just spoke, it feels bad, and I don't know that any of us want to live in that kind of space. So.
Thanks, sir. Right there, look at that, right up front.
Okay, here we go. Hi, thanks. My name is Jeff Wise. I've been living in the village for 2 years with my wife and 2 sons, and I'd like to thank all of the officials here, as well as so many of the residents who do so much to make this town what it is. Why we moved here is because it is a beautiful village. It's a wonderful community, and all of us here have so much. I love to ride my bike and to run. I go up the aqueduct to Lyndhurst, Riverwalk, the town woods. There's so much to enjoy here. We have so much, and so much is shared with us. When I go for a jog to Lyndhurst, to the Riverwalk, to Taxter Ridge, these are all, there's no signs saying I can't go there. And frankly, why would there be? I mean, there's so much empty space, and there's hardly people in many of these places much of the time. And I would like to, for us to all have this spirit of inclusiveness, of openness, of sharing what we have with others around us, and not to have any signs, and just for people to go where they want to go. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if you just took that little sign down, first of all, a lot of people don't even know it's there. First time I heard about it, I said, really? Is that a thing? It doesn't really sound that plausible. It's strange, and it shouldn't really be. I would like just to get rid of the sign and have everyone feel welcomed in Irvington.
Well under time. Please. You're talking to passion. No yielding time.
I also think I'll be under time. So my name is Mark Steiner. I moved here about 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago. We have 2 children. I live on Havermeyer Road with my wife. We are heavy users of Matheson Park. Spring through the fall, we go there a few times a month. We often find that it's not particularly crowded. My son often says he wants to go out and say hello to the people of Irvington, and I think we shouldn't go to Matheson Park if we want to say hello to the people of Irvington. So we go there because it's a beautiful place. Sometimes we go there and we leave because there's no other kids to play with, which is a sad thing. So I see the park in Dobbs very regularly. We go there almost as often when we want to actually be among other people. So I understand it may lead to more maintenance issues, but it's also an extremely pleasant place where kids can play together and you can talk to people. And I often see neighbors from Irvington there. We go up to Terrytown for the same thing, to be around a few more people. So that's fantastic. All the different parks and all the different choices in the villages. When we're in Matheson Park, I often talk to the people there, and they will sheepishly say they're not from Irvington. They'll admit it after a while, and I'll say, I don't care. If not for you, we would be the only people here. So the truth is, the rule is flouted already because the park is just under-attended. You'll find people from neighboring communities who are in Irvington, and that, of course, raises the issue of differential enforcement and who you're allowing into the park. And so something to think about if it opens up the village to potential legal issues overall. And so I understand that the park may suddenly be overwhelmed, though I doubt it, but that could be something that could be addressed in the future. But right now we have a very beautiful park that's massively underutilized. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We're getting the flow now. I like it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Joe, for your introduction, and thank you for all your hard work. We all appreciate it very much. We've been residents for about 13 years now. We have 2 young children, and we really love Matheson. And what we also love is sharing. We think that sharing is caring. And when we had friends, and we wanted them to meet with us, we asked them sometimes to wait, and they had to wait outside, until we got there in summer. And they didn't feel so good about it. And we feel like when we go to other parks, we don't get that same kind of, feeling where we just feel welcome. And we understand that there could be issues with certain things, with opening up, but at the same time, We also believe that since others have done the same, and you said even in Rye, we go to Rye sometimes, there's nobody waiting there and checking passes, and it's not being overwhelmed. The park is actually, kind of normal amount of people having fun. So what we are thinking is, we're thinking as a family is that we should be opening the parks to the public and, see how it works. It doesn't mean that it should stay forever like that if it causes a lot of problems. As you see, rules can change, but we have to give it a chance. And, having it kind of open when the beautiful renovation happens after that, and sharing it with other communities will really make everybody feel good about Irvington. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who's next?
Oh, that can't be all. There we go. See?
We lost a little momentum though. I don't know.
I couldn't let that go. Hi, I'm Lisa again. For full disclosure, I'm married to Mark. So I also live on Havermeyer Road with our 2 young kids. And the board has already heard a lot about me on this issue, a lot from me on this issue. So I'm not going to belabor all the points you've already heard in my email and other places. I do want to tell just a personal story that I've also been turned away from Matheson Park. When Mark and I still lived in the city, we were up for a visit, kind of just up in Westchester exploring, and he got an email that he needed to do an urgent work call. And I was 7 months pregnant. It was a very hot day, and we mapped to the nearest green space, which happened to be Matheson Park. We'd actually never heard of Irvington before. And we came up to the gate, and there was somebody there who asked us for a pass. And we were completely flabbergasted coming from a place where obviously all parks are open. And we said we didn't live here, we didn't have a pass, and we were turned away. And the attendant actually didn't tell us about Scenic Hudson Park, and we didn't realize it was there. So I spent that work call that Mark had sitting in the parking lot of the train station, being really hot and really pregnant. And that left a really bad impression. And when we were looking in Westchester, it was something that we frequently came back to, and we're thinking, do we really want to buy here? And then we fell in love with our house, and I confess we moved here regardless. But from the very moment that we got here, it was something that continued to irk me, and I knew it was an experience that others had shared of being rejected. And that's not the values that we want to stand for. And just to echo what Sarah said, I've also heard those same perceptions, and I wanted to say this is a matter of perception. So I'm not saying our village is exclusive or that it is elitist. I think a lot of people in this village have convinced me otherwise. But we're not getting credit for all of these wonderful things that we're doing because Matheson Park is first and foremost on people's minds when they think about whether Irvington is open and inclusive. So that's all I really want to say about that. And I just want to also really thank RPAC for holding those forums and thank the board for opening up this issue for public comment. And I know the job you do is hard, and it's especially hard when an issue is controversial. We live in a small place, and we're all neighbors and friends, and you don't necessarily know which side of an issue people fall on, and I know that can be challenging for you. So I really applaud you taking this issue on and giving us a space to weigh in on it. So thank you for doing your job.
Thank you. Everyone on the inside makes it hard.
Yeah. Listen to a few people before I talk about. Chris Parker, I lived in Irvington, I guess now 8 years from 2011, up in Downingwood. I've been in that Matheson Park basically every year, I think, at some point. It was a surprise to me, I think several years ago when we went over there and they were like asking for permits to go in, and the park is totally empty. And I'm like, okay. I don't have one. Well, are you a resident? Fine, you can go in. I mean, what are you guys going to do, right? I think another time I didn't have it or it's expired. Well, it's the same thing. It's just really a nuisance thing even to get a permit, even though it's free for us. But you have to go to the rec department sometime when they're open before it expires and renew it every year. And I was aware, I actually came to, I think, Mayor Smith about a year ago, so about, why do we have this silly rule going on here? And then I heard about this deed restriction he talked about, but you actually were working on something. This was coincidental. I just want to say, this whole thing about restricting it to non-residents is stupid, unless there's really some major event where you expect a lot of people to come in. In general, I go to different parks. We go to fireworks, different town every year. We'll go to playgrounds at different towns. As long as it's not overcrowded, nobody really is checking anything, and it doesn't really matter. Deed restrictions like this one from 1947, which is before Brown versus Board of Education, they would have said at that time, okay, even if you're a resident of town, if you're black, go to Scenic Hudson Park. Don't go to this park. It has no rational basis. It's simply, it was a different type of thinking at the time. And I think they even wrote this in here basically because it was being used that way, and they figured it doesn't matter anyway. I don't even know what was the intent of putting that in there. Did we ever research? You did the best you could from the minutes, but I tend to think it was just kind of thrown in there. I also was kind of aware, I mentioned to Mayor Smith a year ago, what happened in Connecticut on an issue similar to this, where all the Connecticut beaches, where some of them had restrictive deeds just like this one, and it was fought on a constitutional basis for freedom of expression of non-residents, and they had to open them all up. They can charge higher fees for non-residents, and Greenwich does the ridiculous things like you've got to go to the senior center and you have to pay $25 to park and whatever to go there, but you can still go there. In our case, it's a small park. It's not usually overcrowded. I think it's permits are silliness. You're going to make people run around to get permits. Even as a resident, it's a pain for me to get it. I certainly don't want it to be residents only. If you want to charge an admission fee on a busy day, I think Ardsley does that sometimes with the Macy Park when it's a busy summer day. If you want to come in, you pay $7 to park the car to go in there. Mostly, and the fee is mostly to limit how many non-residents are in there, so it's not overcrowded with them. Is still available. Even the language in here, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people of the Village of Irvington, that doesn't mean exclusive attendance by them. What about guest policies? Even Greenwich, before that thing happened, you could come with a resident, you could come as a guest of a resident and pay a guest fee. I think there's a lot of different ways in permits, and I think permits are really a turn-off.
3 minutes.
Okay.
Finish your thought.
4th of July, it's silliness. It's un-American to exclude people on a residence basis.
Hi, my name is Senghi. I have lived in the village for about 4 years with my husband and 2 young kids. We also use Matheson Park very frequently. Contrary to some of what other people have said, I have always known about the permit rule. I've always diligently gotten my permit. As a person of color, I am very aware of what requirements are needed to be a person of color in public. I think for those of us who people of color that live in this town, those are the only people I've ever heard say that they have been asked for permits and have had issues with being restricted access to the park, despite the fact that they are residents of the park. And I think, as everyone has spoken to this issue of perception and feeling, that it does not present as an inclusive community, which is why a lot of young families are moving to Irvington these days. I think, I work in a field of implicit bias and white privilege, and I think white privilege is being able to have the knowledge and power to be able to walk into that park without a permit, without being worried about how that might be enforced. And I think raising young kids of color in this village, I'm also curious how enforcement might work in the future. Like if my kids who can't go to the park by themselves now, but older on, if they are going to the park after school without a permit, are they going to be targeted because they don't have the permit on them? I think many of us who support opening the park would also be open to foregoing barbecue pits or restricting parking or helping out to maintain the park. And I think I just want to share that. I just read an email, but I do want to provide that perspective as a person of color. Thanks.
Hi, Wendy Bruckner from Irvington. I know many people don't realize that, but we've lived here for over 30 years, and my son and his friend got a ticket in Tarrytown, inclusive, for being in a park too late at night as teenagers. And it happened many years ago. It's on Sheldon Avenue. There's a little park there, when you make the corner. and he got a ticket, and he had to appear in court, and he was only about 17 years old. So there are obviously rules in other towns. And the other thing I'd like to address is that I walk Scenic a lot and Aqueduct, and there are problems in Scenic that are pretty extensive with maintenance, with bathroom problems, with drug needles, with other things. And I want to know, have you looked at all the problems that Scenic has with the rec department and the beautiful job that they do, and they make it look seamless and they make it look beautiful, but there are a lot of issues and rules not being followed at Scenic. And have you looked at what issues we would possibly have the same as Scenic?
I looked at the last 5 years' crime statistics, and to me, they were statistically insignificant. I think there was 2 arrests of non-residents in Scenic and 1 arrest of a resident in Matheson Park. I guess you could say it's 100% more. I think they're both pretty damn safe. That's not one of the things. Additional crime is not something that I'm personally, speaking for myself, is not one of the big issues in this to me. There's a lot of issues that we have to consider, but additional crime from non-residents is not one of the big ones for me.
Can I just say that a needle also that is found does not necessarily mean that it's for illicit drug use. It could also be used for someone who has diabetes or some other medical issue that requires needle use.
I just want to know if they looked into the issue.
We can't really have back and forth like this because we're living out here tonight.
I would just ask if you looked into it.
We absolutely have, yeah.
Okay.
And we will continue to look into it. Thank you. Who's next?
It's just really, my crowd is really just
Thanks so much for doing this. I know how hard you work, and I know that, and I was on the committee 15 years ago, so I know how much hard work goes into that, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all your thought. I actually spent yesterday reading through all the old Irvington Gazettes, who I should be telling this to, all the references to Matheson Park, just because I got so sucked in and found it so interesting to hear the history of the park. And really enjoyed hearing about sort of the trajectory of the park as a part of Irvington and how important it's been to the village for so long. And in fact, when it was leased to the village, it was the only park the village had, and I think it created a lot of appreciation just because it was one of the only places people had to go for many, many years. I wanted to I'll read my little letter to make it short. I want to say I very much appreciate your willingness to consider removing the residents-only restriction for Matheson Park. As much as I enjoy the beauty of the park, for a number of reasons, I believe that making the park a truly public park would be a substantial improvement for all of us. I also want to share that my heart really fell when you made the recommendation of making a permit required sign. That really, I just found that I just emotionally very sad and off-putting, and I know that no one means anything by it, and you're thinking about important logistical impacts and how to get it done, but it made me sad. First, I wanted to say that although it's not unusual for municipalities to restrict non-resident access to costly and scarce amenities like pools and tennis courts, I do think it's very unusual to actually take the step of actively excluding non-residents from a simple park, as Irvington has done. And I do believe that that's needlessly fostered the impression that we are an unwelcoming community among, in particular, the other residents of the other river towns. It has made an impression. Second, and more importantly for me almost, well, maybe of equal importance, I believe that the park's underutilization makes it less attractive to children and adults. As I read through the newspapers, a century ago, literally hundreds of people a day flocked to Matheson Park to swim, to enjoy the swimming beach. And the community itself invested in lifeguards 2 a day, a dock, diving boards. Every single year there was an additional improvement that the community invested in. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people, including the Red Cross gave swimming lessons. The times have changed, and now the park is sadly very underutilized. And in my experience, as planners have pointed out, and as I've experienced, there just was never anyone for my daughter to play with in the park. And underutilized parks have their own problems that planners will tell you. It's equally difficult to overcome as overutilized spaces. So I think we have to consider blight, neglect, and the things that come with underutilization as real problems in the park. Thanks very much.
My name is Nina Cavrell Dawson. I'm a lifelong village resident, and I can tell you Matheson Park is in my blood. We call it, and I still refer to it as the beach. And when I was growing up, the village of Irvington, the community of Irvington was in Matheson Park. It was not underutilized. We were always there playing as kids. Holidays, you couldn't get into the park. Weekends, the park was packed with people. And it was a sense of community. And it was a community for the people of Irvington. And I thank you for your report about RPAC. I found that very impressive. And I wholeheartedly support your idea of keeping it for residents and school district residents only to preserve that sense of community for the people of Irvington in that jewel of a park that we have. And I think that once this wonderful renovation goes in, I think that park hopefully will come back and be utilized to the extent where the community of Irvington and the people of Irvington will meet there and become more of a place where you will feel safe and secure because you know that the people there are having their park permit and are part of the community of Irvington. So I thank you for your work, and as I said, I do support the idea of keeping it a residence only or park permit only for the people of Irvington.
Spencer?
My name is Spencer. I live off of East Sunnyside Lane. I seldom use the park, if at all, but I'm going to give an opinion anyhow. I think it should be used for residents only. By allowing other town people to come in, it will be too crowded, and our people won't be able to even move in the park. And by allowing every Tom, Dick, and Harry to come in, you're just creating the problem. That's all I have to say.
Hello, my name's Eric Oley. I live in Irvington presently, and I grew up here also. And I would just like to say that I'm completely for opening up the park to everybody. The idea of someone coming to Irvington, eating lunch at Mima, strolling down to the river, the beautiful, beautiful river from our beautiful, beautiful Main Street, and then trying to go have access to the river, only having a parking lot and having a sign in front of Matheson Park that says residents only, is incredibly depressing to me. I've traveled all over the world, traveled up and down the Hudson, been many places, and you can always go to the river. You can always go to the river after a meal with your family, stroll, enjoy the grounds. And I don't see how this would be a detriment to any of the citizens at all. I watched my kids grow up. I went to the park. There were maybe 3 or 4 people there in the mornings at any time. Like it's incredibly underutilized to me. So I mean, I don't understand the restriction at all, and the origins of the restriction. I'm sorry, I came late. I did not see the presentation. It seemed incredibly shaky to me, and I think that should be looked into more. And then I also like to say, if we're going to be spending millions and millions of dollars renovating this park, I think you have to look into the idea of how much grant money can we get. If we're a resident-only park, a private park, are we foregoing millions of dollars in grant money from the state and the county and the federal government because we decided to do that? And I think that has to be like front and center of any presentation for any renovation we do in the park, because that actually is obviously it's a taxpayer decision. That should be a taxpayer, that should be out in the open. We should know how much money that we're foregoing because we're not opening the park up to the general public. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Laura McSpadden. I live on Buckout Street. We've been here about 6 years. And I wanted to add my voice to those of other parents of young children who use the park frequently and so appreciate the work of the Parks Department. We participate in the programs. We love being part of this town. And we are lonely in Matheson Park in the summer. On weekday mornings, on weekend mornings, we are looking for other kids to play with. And that's something you've heard from a number of parents, but I just wanted to reiterate that it does at times feel desolate, and we do pick up and go to another town. And I think that's a shame, because it's a beautiful park, and I'm so excited about the renovations. And I do find the park permit process overly burdensome. I've done it. I get the permit, but I do think a park permit only sign is also pretty exclusive and won't really address that problem. We've met plenty of families from East Irvington who are in the park, and it still is tragically underutilized. So I appreciate that the board is considering making this change, and just wanted to add my voice to those supporting it. Thanks.
Nick Fedden.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tamir Rosenblum. I moved here in 1994, and just wanted to comment on sort of second financial sort of impacts that happen that you don't maybe capture that easily. When we were looking around other towns, and the way we ended up buying our house is because I thought it was like a move that the real estate agent probably did all the time. And she said, oh, like, don't meet me at the house. There's this really nice park down by the train station. And we go there. We had no problem getting in. We absolutely loved it. And we bought a house. So I think that the notion of it being open, I mean, it helps the real estate agents right there, right? So, but it also, I think, it's the first thing you see when you get into this town. So I think it's a signifier in a bigger way. I mean, I live near Halsey. It's got a residence only. I don't think we're all talking about it because, you know, I'd like to see it come down, but it's not what you see. It's not your, it serves as a sort of you're not welcome to Irvington sign to me. I've also never gotten a permit. I never had a problem getting in there. I've had family members who I've told, you know, go tour the park. They've never had a problem. I know I've had friends who I was worried about what would happen to them if I asked them to go in there, and I didn't tell them to go down there. And that burns me. It makes me feel like sick. So I feel really, full disclosure, I'm kind of a resident now. I'm moving into the city, so maybe I have all the interest in the world in just not having to pay more taxes here, because I haven't done that. Having said that, I would love to see this open, no permits. I think it's a beautiful town, and we should make it open to a lot of people. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Nick Seward. I live on North Echo with my wife and our son, who is 5. We're the newest comers, I think, of anybody who's spoken. We moved here in June. I want to confess right
I moved in July.
Oh, excellent. I want to confess right off the bat that I was arrested in Central Park for being in the park after hours when I lived in Harlem. I was shocked because it wasn't well posted, but just as a coda to that, I went to court. And so like my white privilege did not work in the moment, but I went to court, and you believe me, I stood out as a person who had been, gone to court for a minor infraction in New York City. So this freaks me out. I'm just going to say that. So, I mean, it's weird being here and sort of like having all the other parents talk about how their kids feel around in the park. And my impulse is like, oh, I should talk to you after and find out when you're there. You know? That seems unnecessary. We moved from Brooklyn. I know a lot of people are doing it. Brooklyn is different. You go to the park any time of day, any time of day, and your 5-year-old will find lots of other kids to play with. Matheson, we go there. Not so much. So there's that, the practical piece of it, but the psychic piece of it is a little bit tougher. Like, I have to explain to my son that, like, no, not everybody can come to this park. This is just for us. And that is, I mean, we've moved up here from Brooklyn. It looks different. Look at the men on the walls, Look at this room. It just looks different. It's different. We love it here. We're delighted to be here. We made a conscious choice. But we do not have the same kinds of conversations about the people we meet my son and I, than we had in Brooklyn. And I think the psychic piece of the exclusivity is something that I just don't want for my son.
Yeah.
And I might just leave that. So.
I'm Patricia Mulvey, and I live on Willow Street in the Village. And I was actually courted. My husband and I met, and he used to take me to Matheson Park on a regular Sunday morning basis, and we would go and read the New York Times. We've had probably 20 big family reunions there. It's always been, to me, an open and warm space. I don't see, if there's no deed restriction from the Mathesons telling us that we can't open it, I really believe that we as a community should be open to all people, no matter whether they come off the train. I come off the train a lot, or by bus or whatever. But I think that that is a gem that we hold, and we should share it with the world. Thank you.
John Dawson, lawyer here for my wife. Number one, I'm a history teacher. I teach in Yonkers, so we have lots of different diversity in Yonkers. But one thing that bothered me about the discussion, as a history teacher, I gotta wonder, what did they mean by public in 1945 in Irvington? To me, in all likelihood, if you did more checking on that, not just looking at the deeds, but looking at the discussion, as we already heard, it probably meant public meaning Irvington, because the communities were a lot more separated then than they are today. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I grew up in North Shore. In North Shore, if you wanted to go to Hudson Park, you had to have a pass. If you wanted to go to Glen Island, a county park, you had to have a pass. I don't see the problem with the pass. I really don't. But also in those things, if you wanted to go to Hudson Park and you didn't live in North Shore, you had to pay more money. And that's been discussed already. Okay, these things, it costs money to keep that park up. Scenic Hudson, everybody is entitled to go to it. We knew it when we accepted it, and we accepted the responsibility of taking care of it financially because of what we got for so little. What did we get, $1? We got the whole park eventually?
For the piece of property.
Yes. Yeah. So we have upkept it. We understood that going in. In this particular case, we're talking about a park that very well could have been intended only for village residents, and now we're trying to discuss what things meant 75 years ago. But regardless of all of that, the biggest thing I think is being overlooked is, why do we bother to have these people? These people spent a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of effort. They made you suggestions. They said, okay, the park's going to be closed for a year. Then after that, another year, let us try having district residents, school district residents involved in it. What's the problem with waiting that 2 years? Okay, I was on the school board when we had the whole thing about the memorial up on Main Street. Okay, it's on school district property. That's why I had a vote taken, and we accepted it. And you guys worked your tails off to get it done and redone. And we had non-village residents put on that because it's on school property. So having the fact that, as Joe said, hey, non-village residents getting charged a little bit more for it, as long as they're willing to agree to it, fantastic. I live in the village of Irvington. Can I go to the Greenberg Parks? No. If you're on Taxer, can you go to the Greenberg Parks? Yes. Okay, why is that? I'm not asking Greenberg to change. All I'm saying is, let's listen to these people who did all that hard work.
Tom Thacker. I'm a resident of North Lookout Street, and I'd like to thank RPAC for all the hard work that they've done. Joe Archino met with me privately about a year ago, and I'm really appreciative of the time that he gave me, and I thank the board also for putting this meeting together. I'm also a former history teacher, and I'm well aware that there was a time at which in our nation's history when open and inclusive parks was not a shared national value. But I think if you go around today, around the country, and whether it's in deep red Idaho or it's in deep blue New York City, you will find that open, inclusive parks are a shared national value. They're not one for blue states or one for red states. It's a value that is shared across this country. In regards to the tradition that Michael spoke about, the fact that the park has been private for 100 years, that's not an argument, that's just a statement of fact. And I think, as we know, over time, times change, and sometimes values change as the times change. And I think that the question before us right now is whether at this point in our village's history, whether the values of the current residents are such that they would like to see the park opened to all. Certainly at one point, the values suggested that we didn't want the parks to be open to non-residents, but I believe at this point in time, and I think that part of the indication of that is all the people who have spoken tonight, but I know that's not necessarily a fair representation. But I believe that the answer really is that the town would like to see, or the village would like to see, the parks open, and I'm really, really encouraging the board to do so. Thank you.
That was taking me out by leaving.
Hi, my name is Eileen Burgos, and I have lived in Irvington for 9 years. When I originally moved to Irvington, I had no idea that the parks were private, and I live on Riverview Road. And my husband handed me a permit because, like he said, we're people of color, and he was like, "You need this permit, always have it with you." And I really almost never had that permit with me. And whenever I went there with my kids, I have 2 daughters, or my nieces or nephews, I always felt like a little nervous approaching the park. And I have to say, I was never asked for the permit, but it's an icky feeling, and it's for someone who, again, likes this town and have obviously chosen to stay here. But I feel that, in some ways, I feel like I'm judging myself, because here I am living in this town where we have this park, where I myself worry that how is the enforcement going to happen at the entrance of the park? And I think if I don't, ask that question, and why we feel the need to restrict access, how we're going to enforce that, I think, I'm basically fooling myself. And it really bothers me to live somewhere where a park that's completely underutilized, it's a park that's not so easily accessible to people, or this concept of outsiders or people who are coming on the train. I think all of those things kind of make me uncomfortable. So I think that as a community, and I just to echo what was just said, we have to think about what our values are. What are our values, not in 1947, what are our values today? What are the values of the people who live in Irvington? Do we want to have, and I know that there's different viewpoints on this, but, I hope that I made the right choice, the people who are coming here who, believe that we have this resource, it's a public resource, that we can share this, and that, if we were overwhelmed by people, and I think probably the most overwhelmed I ever see Matheson Park, and I'm sure there are lots of non-residents, is the 4th of July fireworks, and I think you guys do an amazing job at keeping that very sort of, running really well. So I think we have examples of when the park is overwhelmed, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. So I hope that, again, I made a good choice, and I hope that people who continue to move to Irvington, who share these values, find a place that's welcoming and inclusive.
Thank you.
John Malone. I've been a resident, I think, for approximately 15 years, based on the age of my children. I think that's right. There was some discussion about history, and I thought it would be helpful for people when making this decision to understand sort of the history, or just have a brief discussion about the history of the suburbanization of this area and much of the country starting in about 1900. In the beginning of this suburbanization, there actually were race-based zoning systems that went into place. Around 1890, one of the first examples of that is in Baltimore. Roland Park is a famous Olmsted, actually, suburb that was developed. And I think in 1917, the race-based zoning that was in place that basically said you couldn't live somewhere if you were this color, many of them in the South, it was overturned in 1917 at the Supreme Court level. At that point, southern cities mostly, but some northern cities, they started hiring planners to put together zoning regimes that would maintain the status quo, but would pass the test of the Supreme Court. And one of the things that went in place at that time was single-family zoning, and zoning that was based on use, that sort of limited where apartment buildings could be. At certain points, there were actually zoning regimes in place that said you couldn't live in sin, and the notion there was that you couldn't have a couple that wasn't married living. And these were all directed, you could argue that they were directed at race, but they were certainly directed at a certain class, so that the value of single-family houses were effectively exclusionary, so that you had suburbanization, pattern of suburbanization that was exclusionary at its sort of core, at its zoning core. At the same time, language about controlling suburban amenities came in, many in Connecticut and in the North as well. So a lot of the language of limiting and controlling access to suburban amenities was in the same sort of in the same milieu, and it was driven by planners, and it was driven, you know, by big firms in New York City, and that were hired by municipalities. But at its very basis, it was racist and exclusionary. And as we've moved into the 60s, and as some of those things overturned, what's been left is it's a very class-based division. So what you end up having is an income inequality where people with less money are living in a more dense environment in an urban situation that sits, and the suburbs become much more homogeneous and higher income. So right. So just as a context for what we're talking about, whether this happened in 1947 or how it was treated earlier, I just thought it would be important for people to understand that it's part of a larger arc of suburbanization in the country that might be helpful to people. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Clark. Been a resident of Irvington longer than I want to admit, I'd say. So I don't have to tell you how old I am. My family's been very, very involved in this community. My mother-in-law's name is on the plaque at Matheson Park. My wife's name is on the plaque at Cedar Hudson. They both served on the rec commissions. I served as a police officer in this town for 20 years, and I'm pretty involved in the community. First of all, I want to thank the commission and Joe for all the work they did on this, and the amount of time they put in looking into all the aspects of this. I think we should listen to them as far as what their recommendations are, and I think we should give it a chance, the suggestions that they're making, and see what happens. I agree it should be opened up to Irvington School District residents, because the school district really defines the community, not the town, the village borders, and I agree with that 100%. It should also be open to any taxpayers in the villages. Many people pay taxes in this village that aren't actually residents, but are taxpayers. At the end of the renovation, let's give it a year. Let's see what kind of usage the park has. When I grew up here, it was called the Beach, Nina. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we all lived down there as kids, and the park was very utilized back then. Today there's a lot of other options. So to say the park is empty because it's residents only, it's not necessarily true. It's just that there's so many other options to go to throughout the county. Most of the parks that everyone here is saying is open parks or whatever are very passive parks with low maintenance, such as Taxter Ridge or whatever. Matheson Park, because you have picnic tables and barbecues and everything else, people do spend the day there. It's not you go down for an hour and you leave, or you go strolling through the woods or whatever. You go there and you spend the day. When I was a policeman in town, we used to open the park at 6 o'clock in the morning, and back then there used to be a line of village residents waiting to get the prime tables. And the 4th of July, the line was down the street. Do we really want to open that up? And especially on the 4th of July, when village residents would probably be well outnumbered for picnic tables to watch the 4th of July celebrations, where we're footing the bill. I think that we should take the recommendations of the Parks Department and see where it goes, and then if the park is still underutilized, let's revisit that at that time and make an educated decision at that time. Okay? Thank you.
Nice job.
My name is Chris Canning. I live on Ferris Street. I don't really have an opinion so much as I have a couple of questions. I always thought of the parks as an amenity for Irvington residents. I've had so many birthday parties there that were fantastic, but I always had to reserve them, and I wonder if you would still be able to do that, if you could still reserve Halsey Pond, the tea house, for parties. What happens to graduation and stuff like that if it's public? And then the other question was, what are the tax implications? I don't know how this gets funded if you get money from the state and what that means. Do you have to hire new employees? What does that mean for our taxes, et cetera? Thanks.
I was going to say, I thought it was something I said, but I didn't have to say anything. My name is Karen Schatzel, and I've lived in Irvington since 1968 and raised my family here. And for a long time, I've been involved with Abbott House. And I know there are many people in this room who have also been involved and who actually helped to build the playground there. And I'm very grateful for that fact. But I'd also like to see those youngsters have a chance to come down to Matheson Park during the week when it's not crowded and find out what a picnic is like in the United States, and find out what the freedom of it is to have a picnic here. And also, I live in Half Moon Apartments, and we have two maintenance men who are the second and third brothers who have worked through all the years that I have been there, and I could not live there in my 82nd year without them. But one of them has Saturday off, and he has two young children, a toddler and a little older child, and I'd love for them to be able to come and have a picnic also on a Saturday when he has a day off, because we don't have a lot of diversity here. And I would like to see our children have more opportunity also to meet people of other types. And when one of the mothers said there aren't many kids in the park, I remember bringing kids to the park years ago when there are lots of kids here, and now there aren't, because I've also experienced that. So I would hope that we could open the park gradually and in different ways so that we could benefit from more diversity.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Hi there. My name's Melissa Jones, and I live on South Dutcher Street with my family. Echoing some of the things that we've heard from other parents here, I actually don't use Matheson Park that often with my kids because it is not very busy often, and sometimes I will take my children either by car or, God forbid, by train to Tarrytown or Ossining or Doubtfire or Hastings to use the different public spaces that are available, and afterwards we'll buy lunch in town or we'll go shopping in some of the stores, and just really get to enjoy some of the other villages along the river. And it's a beautiful experience for my children, and we feel really welcome. And I would love to see folks feeling that when they come here to visit Irvington as well. So I think the underutilization is really the driving factor and why I'm not in Matheson Park more with my family, even though we only live 3 blocks away from it. I'm really excited for some of the improvements because I think that will help. I think that's really great. I actually want the park opened for more value-based reasons, as some other folks have brought up. I have been an educator my entire career, and currently I work with teachers and with students to learn about inclusion and diversity. And one simple tactic that we teach teachers and young people is to use people-first language, people-centered language. So rather than saying residents of Irvington or non-residents of Irvington or those people, we would say people who reside in Irvington or people who reside just outside of Irvington or in East Irvington. Because what it does is it takes that label and judgment off of the word and puts the highlight on the fact that we're all people, right? People who live in Irvington might have blue hair, right? People who live in Irvington may vote one way or another, but they're still people. And people who live outside of Irvington are people, and people have a right to safe public space where they can come together. And my hope is to live in a town where we value that and put that at the core of our decision making. Thanks.
Hi, Peter Bernstein from North Cottonette Street. I just wanted to mention something that reacted to what Joe had said earlier. Yeah, I agree with the folks who are saying the park should be open, but I also know that, you know, we have great parks, and they're great because of the hard work of people who keep them great. So what concerns me, you know, I don't believe, and I don't think Joe does either, that it's his role to decide what our community values are or what we want to do, but he's got to implement it. So what I'm taking away from here is, wow, you know, maybe Joe and his department is under-resourced for what we're going to expect them to do in the future or what we expect them to do now. I think as a community, you know, I'm going away with that's an important aspect of the discussion. Not that that should drive what we decide, but it's important to hear from him and be able to make sure he and his folks have the tools to implement what we want. I would also just say one other thing is that, you know, change is hard, you know, especially for those of us who used to something, used to something be the way it was and enjoyed it, especially when we were younger, you know, we liked the albums, we listened to it. We were 14, I loved Matheson Park with my kids. My daughter Ruby's, her birthday is May 31st. We had every birthday party in her park with the children of other people, and you know, in the room. I met one of the speakers in the park for the first time, but I'd say beware incrementalism, because sometimes the reaction to change is to be very incremental about change as just a reaction to try and hold it off when it's not necessary. So I would say if there's real problems and we want to do something, let's not be slow about them, but let's deal with the problems that we perceive in a, you know, an aggressive, progressive way. Thank you.
Anyone want to go again?
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you.
Must have been the same switch as Detroit.
I'll give you 3 minutes, 15 seconds. Thank you.
I just want, whoever raised the question about whether, that's a question I have too, about whether you've looked into the ability to get aids or grants for the work that you're doing, $1.6 million. I'm glad you're looking to do that work. I thank you for all the work that you're doing to improve our parks. That's so important, and for all the other things you do for the village. But that's a big question. That's a lot of money, and if we have an opportunity to get that, you know, what does it take? I know that our trustees have done a great job finding funds for Main Street and other projects, and so it makes me wonder, you know, are there any opportunities there? Because we do want great amenities, but if we can get aid or grant to support it, I think that's something that we should definitely look into. And I want to just echo also the point about incrementalism. I know that in your meetings up till now that your recommendation is to do it incrementally and to include permits. I find getting the permits kind of challenging, 2 kids, 2 jobs, trying to get to rec. Sometimes you have later hours. I appreciate that too. But it is challenging, and to expect all the folks who'd like to use the park to be able to get to a rec center to use that is a challenge. I'd ask you to rethink that. because I wouldn't support that as a resident, and I hope that you'll reconsider that aspect as well. But I really do think you're doing a great job in terms of reaching out to the community here, and I hope that we've been able to give you some new things to think about today. So thank you.
Hi. I'm Shane Ferguson, live on South Ferris Street for about 33 years. I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I'm going to turn this way for a second. I think that a lot of the newcomers may not know the history, and I want to give you just a little bit of history. When I moved here some 32 or 33 years ago, I was told that there was East Irvington would all have Greenberg Recreation, and they would have a pool. And the village would not have a pool, but we would have a park on the river. It was the only park on the river. It was Matheson Park. It was way before Scenic Hudson. So we knew that we were giving up a pool, and we were going to have little children, but we were going to have this park on the river, and we were excited about it. So I want you to know that there are people who have lived here a really long time. Their value added that they were promised was this special park, while other people got the pool. So now there are communities all around us, and they all have permits, and they pay fees, and they're resident only for their pools and their rec centers and their clubhouses. They include also all kinds of complexes who have that, co-ops and communities, closed communities. We still don't have a pool. We've fought for 30-some years for a pool. We never got one. So I'm giving you just a little bit of history so that you know from all the older people who live here that it's not all about just having a private little special community where we're trying to keep people out. It's just the way it was. And there are many communities that do that for different reasons, but they do it with a pool and other things. And we don't have that. We had the beach and the park and the little gas grills, and we had parties for our children there. So I also want to say that came 4th of July, there were a few years where there was so much overcrowding at 4th of July that they actually made it, I think they made it in September or something, but
It's Irvington Day, yeah.
it was Irvington Day. I started to tell my daughter it was for her birthday because it just happened to fit. So, right, so that was just because there was such overcrowding. So these are just things to consider. I appreciate everything that all of you did, what you said. I think it's all very important. And I have to say, I really agree with so many of you in what you've said. But I thought the background would help you when you hear people complaining about the other side.
Hi, my name is Kay O'Keefe, and I live on South Buckout Street. I first moved to Irvington 35 years ago, and I lived on Station Road at that time. When I first moved here with my children, we didn't think that we were getting the park at the river because we didn't have a pool. We didn't know that there was such a difference between East Irvington and Irvington that we couldn't use the Greenberg pool. And I was always outraged that the students of Irvington schools could not go to Matheson Park. It never made any sense to me that the children that went to school with my children could not use that facility. I think that it's very important that we open that park not only to the school district. Nobody uses the park now. It's terrible. It's such a beautiful park, and I think if we opened it to the public, I don't think we have anything to fear. I think that many people would come here and enjoy using the park, and I think that's what the park is for, and I think that's what the Matheson deed intended when he said public. Thank you.
Lana, save us again. Joe?
Add a few things. With the park, it is underutilized, without a doubt. But one of the things that you have to keep in mind here is if you're going to open the gates, then it probably won't be underutilized. But when we do have events here, it's going to be a problem. Going back when I was on the police force, we actually did have to cancel the 4th of July celebration after the year before. We had so many people, because we used to open it up to non-residents on the 4th of July, that it really became a dangerous situation. There's one gate in and out of that park, and you had over 10,000 people in the park. If something was to happen in that park, especially, I'm really talking about the 4th of July here, that it could be a disaster. It could be a stampede trying to get out of that gate. And a few years back, when I was still on the police department, we did have an issue. And one of the people lighting off the fireworks almost lost his arm. And that could have came back on the crowd, and it could have been pandemonium or whatever. So, I mean, if you're going to open these gates, then you need to put some rules in place, and you know, maybe on certain things that you say, okay, we're going to open it Monday to Friday to out-of-town residents. On weekends, you need a pass. Special events, you need a pass. And look at it hard before you just say, okay, we're going to open the gates, because come the 4th of July, someone's going to have to be counting there how many people get in the park. And in the first 10,000, maybe no village residents at all. And you know, you're paying for an event as a taxpayer to go to, and you may not be able to get in the park as a village resident. I understand the park now is not that crowded at all, especially during the week, during the day. You know, my daughter-in-law takes my granddaughter there, and she says the same thing that I heard from every other young mother here, that it's kind of boring. And that is the case. But that could be addressed, you know, through time limits and certain things like that, than just saying we're going to open it wide open. I believe if you're really going to consider it, then you need to look at the increment level and do it in increments and see how it goes. We're going to do this, we're going to see how it goes, we're going to do that, we're going to see how it goes. If you're going to do it, don't just open it completely and say, well, it's going to be a free-for-all, because that's just what it's going to be. So, thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to go just very quickly, but like I said, I'm new here, but I've been to a few events, and it seems like it is a free for all at these events. When I come, so, you know, there's the Halloween thing, and then I don't remember there's some harvest thing. No one's asking me for a permit. I don't see any. I don't see them. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys can correct me, but
we don't check at special events.
Right. So, it doesn't seem like there's pandemonium happening and 10,000 people at these events. So, I mean, again, I'm new, and maybe I'm missing something, but that doesn't seem to be happening at these events where it's so crowded and that people are coming from, you know, all over this tri-state area to, you know, the Halloween event. So, and they're not, you know, checking everyone's permit. So I don't know why it would be different if we change the rule.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. One thing to remember is on the events you're mentioning, there's probably 15 staff that get hired for that event, as opposed to a Saturday or Sunday where there'd be one person working the gate. So those events where there's not pandemonium, there's also a very hefty payroll day that day. The hayride, we had probably 22 people work it, between people in costumes, people on safety, people on security, plus police department. So those things just don't happen. It doesn't mean that everyone there was just, it wasn't a free-for-all. There was lots of staff there.
No, but they're not asking for permits.
They're not, because we open it. We only use permits when we feel it's necessary because the park could get overcrowded, or because there are numerous families that have planned big events on weekends, and we try to ensure that they have the opportunity to get enough tables, to get their families in, and to hold their events. That's why we put people down there. But for special events, again, you mentioned the hayride. That's a perfect one. Just think, you said you went down, there were lots of people. We know over 1,000 people rode on the carriages that night. But again, it cost us about $8,000 to run that event. And about $4,000 of it goes for the horses and personnel. So things don't happen for free.
Well, of course not.
So if you're going to have more people, there's going to be a correlation to expenses. So.
Sure.
Peter Bernstein, another quick comment. You know, one of the things that has come up, which I can relate to because my daughter's birthday is May 31st, and we always wanted tables. It would be great if we could maybe, you know, again, this is another request that would require resources, but if we could have some online booking, reservation of the picnic spots for weekends, so that folks wouldn't have to feel like they got to go, you know, throw tablecloths on there, and a thing like that would, you know, make, and we can make that residents only, or give residents preference, and then that would take, you know, might take care of that issue. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christina DiCarlo. I'm an Irvington resident. I live on Sunnyside Place, at the Pennybridge Manor complexes. I want to thank Joe, Janet, and everybody who's worked so hard in this initiative. The park is absolutely underutilized. I'm an occupational therapist in maybe I'll talk to the crowd. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and okay. I'm not used to this. And it's absolutely underutilized. There's many reasons why. There's so many more working parents now than ever before. Children are in school more than ever before, full-day kindergartens, even full-day preschools. The kids are not outside playing like they used to play decades ago. And that, as my husband would say, that's one of my platforms, is just like, go out and play. And that's one reason why I was very happy to be part of the playground committee, as I call it, because that's one of my passions, is children need to be out there and playing. I'm for opening the playground, the park, to others. It's my passion and my lifelong dream, just to keep the kids playing, and Irvington residents and school district residents. And I think that the kids are spending too much time inside to begin with. Let's get them out to the park, and let's be welcoming. Let's get them to Bazaar. Let's get them to rec center, playground activities. Let's get their parents here for dinner and lunch, and let's invite them to the park.
Hello, I'm still Lisa again, and I'm back with just one small comment, because I've heard, I think, from Joe tonight. I know Joe has said before that opening up the park might necessitate more people to be stationed at the gate, more park staff. Is that not the case?
Not at the gate, no.
Okay, because that was actually something I really wanted to speak to, because I think having somebody at the gate specifically creates such a perception that that person is a bouncer. So even though they're not actually checking passes, people have asked me, like, what are they doing? Who are they checking? They didn't check me. Why didn't they check me? Are they waiting for a person of color? People have said those things explicitly to me. So I think having somebody at the gate, again, feeds that perception especially. So if we do need park staff to be there, whether it's on crowded days or on weekend days, I just really love to see them function more like park rangers, somebody who's actually inside the park, maybe educating people about sustainability in the park, or answering questions, or chatting with residents about park history, and obviously looking into making sure that everybody's is safe in the park and there's nothing going on that's problematic. So I'd really love to see nobody at the gate, no matter what else happens tonight. Thank you.
My printer didn't work, pardon the phone. I'm Leola.
More green there.
Yeah, I suppose.
from North Continent Street, you know, 2 blocks from the park. And so, you know, I go down there a lot. And, you know, sometimes I've been like, asked for a pass. Not always, but sometimes. And I'm like, oh, I don't really carry the pass or even bother to get one. And so, you know, I've found that sort of annoying. And my argument here won't be all about me, I promise. But but I guess what I was trying to think about was, as I read some of the arguments about it costing more to have the park open, it sort of feels to me like it would cost less because you wouldn't have to have this attendant occasionally or these passes. And the notion of potential funding, you know, if it was an open park. But, you know, just to give you a little background, you know, like just like everybody else has said, at my 40th birthday, my family had in the park. My mother has the same name as me, so she pretended she was me to reserve it as a resident. But so how funny that my family might not have been able to have a party for me because they don't live in Irvington. But really, I love.
Confessions in your.
Yeah, I know, right? But yeah, quite seriously, and many of you know how involved I am in the community and how much I love the park. I love our community, and how much I help in the park, and you know, constantly cleaning up trash and recycles. And I'm so thrilled we have recycle bins now. So, you know, but one of the things also that I've marveled at that really has won my heart is this little mecca that happens around sunset time. Single people, small groups of friends, couples, whoever, who go to see the sunset, who take pictures of the sunset. And my sense is they're probably from the restaurants and things. So I wanted to talk to you about the economic benefit of our park being open. And, you know, even if you decide not to make it a public park, I hope that you will stop checking passes or, you know, just don't impede the economic benefit of people coming to Irvington, into our restaurants, our businesses, that sort of thing, and be sort of not allowed to come into the park. And so, yes, I do want to be open and inclusive, and you're probably wondering what the heck my position is here. My position is I'd like things mostly the same. I don't want to see any more built environment. I feel that our biggest threat here in this park is not who we're letting in. It is rising seas and storm surges. And so anything that you all do to the park, you have got to keep that in mind. And we also have a huge nature deficit disorder. I love that it's quiet and underutilized. I'm sort of unique there. But we need natural plantings that will mitigate storm surges and rising seas. Nature deficit disorder, built environments for kids is everywhere. We need more nature in our natural, passive park. That's where we should focus on being ready for this global warming climate change.
I'm just going to add one small part in from when I was out of time before. Heard a lot of great things here tonight from everyone, and I agree with a lot of what I've heard here. I just want to leave one more thought, is that this 1947 deed, even if the deed restriction was on all of them and all valid, right, who has standing to challenge that at this point? Who's going to take it away from you? What are they going to do with it? I mean, you're going to expect the residents to somehow have some kind of standing for what the board decides to do? I think, you know, it's an outdated concept on there. The intention was to make sure that the village benefited from it. It wasn't sold to a company or commercialized. It was kept as a park. I think that was the real intent behind it. And we're supposed to handle it responsibly so that our community benefits from it. And there are benefits from bringing, as we've heard from diversity things, of having non-residents there as well. It's simply a matter of making sure that we get not overcrowding, we get access to it. Playland Park, for example, I think they have barbecues over there too, but you have to reserve it and you have to pay a permit for that. And you're guaranteed to have it because you paid for it. I mean, if it gets to that point, then, you know, we still can give residents preference. I think it's a very manageable thing here. And as far as things like I heard about the fireworks being a fire hazard, that's probably true. Even if it's only residents, we probably should move it to Scenic Park just for that reason. But that's a whole separate, not related to this issue at all. So I hope the board really takes a good look at this and makes a responsible decision that really invests in our future and upholds, the open culture that we live in today, which is very different than from 1947 when the thing was made, where people were finding ways to kind of keep restrictions from long ago in place. Outdated concept at this point, and I think that's what we've heard from a lot of people. Thank you very much.
For anyone who is wondering, high school graduation will be held in scenic Hudson Park in June. We've worked that out with the school district since Matheson will not be available.
I'll just take one more minute, but I just want to say, I think the loudest message we've heard tonight is the great appreciation that everybody has for the parks that we have. And for many of us, it's that desire to share what we have. And the Matheson Park, our whole park system is the envy of the Westchester community. I know lots of people within the community, within the county, and it really is. And I want to go back to something that Peter Bernstein said about giving more resources to the Recreation Department, because they do miracles every day, and I think that we have to find a way that we can help them make more miracles. Thank you, Joe.
Michael, the spirit still move you, or you just want the last word tonight? Now you say it now? Well,
I have nothing more to add. This has been fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. The thing I always like about nights like this is we get so many new faces. I'm always impressed when people are here 5 or 6 months and they already know that's going on. That's very amazing. If anyone here is not signed up for our email blast, please do that, because it's the best. It's the easiest way to stay informed. Don't trust Facebook. I think, again, the bottom line is that Matheson's a very special place. I think our entire waterfront's a very special place. It's by far, to me, the nicest waterfront on the Hudson. We're so lucky that we have Bridge Street in the middle that gives us a great commercial base. And then we have 2 parks bookending it. Like, you couldn't have designed it any better. And we want to make sure we get this right. And I think that's why we're listening and not talking. I think politicians love to talk, as I'm showing right now. But really, we should listen more. And I think that was our whole goal tonight, was to listen and hear what people say. It's not just a popularity contest. That's not what we're paid to do. We're not paid to make popular choices. We're paid to think about this. We heard what RPAC said. We heard what a lot of you said. Now we have to go back and come up with our list of questions. There's costs, there's impacts, there's things to learn from other communities. I know that some of that started already. I know Larry and Joe have been talking to other communities, not just about things that didn't work, but things that did work. Because a lot of this was management. If Joe had 500 people, we could have buses come up. So we could pay for the buses to get out and pick people up and bring them back. So I think we've heard a lot. There's a lot to digest. We're going to digest it. We're going to come up with our own list of questions. If some people couldn't make it here tonight, you'll have another chance to speak. I think that there's one thing I didn't mention. We had 31 separate people speak. We also had, as of I think about 4 o'clock, Larry, there were 27 emails we received about this. 19 were for, 6 were against, and 2 were undetermined. Some of them were not really about the topic, but they said, hey, Matheson Park, let's talk about this. But we do love getting emails from everyone, so feel free to keep them coming. I think I got another 7 since we had this number that I've been forwarding to Larry. Some of them came in during the meeting. So I love the passion about this, but again, it's because it's such a wonderful place. Irvington's a wonderful place, Matheson's a wonderful place. We all care about it. Whichever side of the fence you're on here, we want to do the right thing for our neighbors. We might have different views on what that is. It's the 5 of our job to kind of figure out what that is now, from everything we've heard, from all the impacts, from the potential impacts, unforeseen impacts, and that's what we're going to work on. Luckily, we kind of have some time because the park's going to be closed, so we can figure this out, and there's not some kind of springtime hanging over our head where we have to make a decision. So this is great. We're going to need your input as we do this. We found that every one of these hard things we've done, from something like downtown parking to rezoning things, It's always much, much better when we get almost too much input, until literally we go, who wants to speak? And then no one. And that's what's great, because they're like, you've been heard, and there's nothing more you can do than be heard. We might not listen, and we might not do what you want, but you've been heard. And I think that makes a big difference. But it's also not some kind of show that we want to put on. We don't think the five of us have the best ideas. Maybe some of us do. But we really need your input to get the best solution. And this is a big part of this. The meetings that RPAC had were a big part of that too, for rule changes. And they listened, and they're making those changes. I think the one thing we all agree is that Matheson Park is underutilized. And it's a shame, because it is one of the most special places in the world to me. From when I was a kid and lived in Tarrytown in the Irvington schools and couldn't get in, but sometimes I did. It is a special place. You have those old memories, you have new memories. It's just a great place, and we want to keep it a great place. And I might end it on that.
If people have this, were there still copies of these back there? Okay.
If you want to see the deeds.
You want to take another?
But we do appreciate all this. This is not the end. This is just the beginning, and we're going to get this right. Thank you all for coming
I got